Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. Welcome just as you are. If you arrive with a mind that is calm or chaotic, a heart full with sadness or psalm, welcome. What a gift for this gathering of souls that in the course of your morning you found your way here. Unitarian Universalist minister Mark Morrison Reed writes that the central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, he says, it inspires us to act for justice. And this morning, justice is again the calling we turn our attention to. And I am delighted that this morning we have an esteemed guest in our pulpit, the Reverend Fred Robinson. You may recognize Fred from his work as Executive Director of MECMIN. He's recently finished his term in leadership there, but I have witnessed a number of the interfaith gatherings that he's made possible here in Charlotte, and the way he creates a warm welcome for people who don't think alike to come together and explore even the most demanding and difficult topics. Reverend Robinson is a scholar in the hallowed tradition of liberation theology. And having seen him give a paper at last year's Liberating Theologies conference, I have immense gratitude for the ways that he applies his intellect and grace to the problems of oppression to help us imagine a more just existence. And after seeing and feeling so affected by that paper, I had to work up my courage to ask him to be a guest in our pulpit, and I have to say he's so down to earth, and I'm really glad he said yes. Gathered here together, let us awaken our longing for a world that is more fair and kind, strengthening the spiritual will that helps us build a new way. Welcome all. As we prepare to sing, would you turn and welcome the people around you? we light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, grateful for the flame that guides us deeper into the struggle, grateful for the fire that illuminates our collective courage and tenacity. Our first reading is by the Reverend Dr. James Cone, who is one of the founding parents of Black liberation theology. In an essay entitled "Theology's Great Sin, Silence in the Face of White Supremacy," Cone writes, "Begin the anti-oppression struggle where you are. Set your pace as if you are going to do that work for the rest of your life. There is joy in this work because it enhances your humanity. Justice work in any situation is the most satisfying activity one can do." Cone goes on to say, "We must do something concrete about dismantling white supremacy. I know this task is not easy. It's a very difficult endeavor. Yet do not be discouraged. Despair only supports the enemy. Working together with each other and with the great spirit of the universe, we can accomplish more than we ever dreamed."
Amen. Before our reading, let me just say it is a joy and a delight. I'm excited and delighted to be here with you this morning. I want to thank Minister Eve Stevens for her hospitality, church for its hospitality, and this wonderful music staff. And I want to thank Pastor Jay Leach in his absence for this wonderful opportunity. Our reading this morning is from the Hebrew Bible, Nehemiah, book of the Nehemiah, chapter number 4, verses 1 through 9. Nehemiah, chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. These words are recorded. When Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. And in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was set at his side, said, "What are they building? Even the fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stone. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their hearts. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. For the time that is ours together, I want to try to preach from this thought: rebuilding the walls of justice. Rebuilding the walls of justice. It is a sad but undeniable fact that whenever you attempt to do something good for justice, you're always going to face some opposition. The enemy is not going to be sitting on the sidelines cheering you on, say, "You go, boy," and "You go, girl." But in a real sense, the forces of evil will come together to trip you up, throw you off course, and rain on your parade. Whenever you attempt to fight for justice, fairness, and equality, the enemy is always going to show up to silence you, mock you, and try to defeat you. When Dr. King and other civil rights luminaries of the 60s took a stand against unjust laws, discrimination, and Jim Crow and said, "We're not going to take it anymore," many of them were beaten, arrested, and thrown in jail, not because they did something wrong, but because they did something right. When Colin Kaepernick decided to take a knee during the national anthem to bring attention to police brutality and the lack of justice given to black and brown bodies when it comes to being killed by law enforcement, his reputation was tarnished, and he was not re-signed to the NFL, and he was called an SOB by our made-in-Russia president. Again, not because he did something wrong, but because he did something right. All I'm trying to do is highlight the undeniable fact that whenever we attempt to stand up for what's right, the forces of evil and darkness are always present with us to try to knock us down, trip us up, silence us, or throw us off course. Listen, you can't live a life of health without catching some hell. You can't work for peace without encountering some pain. You can't fight for opportunity without running into some opposition. Can I tell you again? Whenever you attempt to walk with God, you're going to run into an enemy. Whenever you try to do what's right, somebody is going to try to do you wrong. Whenever you lift up the whole truth and nothing but the truth, somebody is going to spread some alternative facts. All I'm trying to say is, if you're trying to live right, you're going to face some opposition. If you're an advocate for justice and a believer in liberation, you are going to face some opposition. Well, that's what's going on in our text this morning. Nehemiah is facing some opposition. In the text, God instructed Nehemiah to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem to protect its citizens from enemy attack. The walls had been decimated and destroyed after Babylonian captivity. So Nehemiah, who was a cupbearer and a trusted advisor to the Persian king Artaxerxes, decides to answer the call of God and go back to rebuild the walls. Now, the very name Jerusalem in the Bible comes from the Hebrew root word shalom, which means peace. So in a real sense, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in today's context could be summarized as a call to rebuild the walls of peace in the world, the walls of social protection, the walls of goodness, love, justice, and mercy for all of God's children. And in Charlotte, in our beloved gleaming Queen City, we have to rebuild the walls of opportunity, racial justice, and equality for all of God's citizens. In fact, according to the much talked about Opportunity Task Force report, poverty in Charlotte is a killer. In Charlotte, nearly a quarter of our children are poor. 5% of them are white, 36% of them are black, and 39% of them are Hispanic. And as horrifying as these numbers are, what is more troubling is the fact that because of the isolation that comes with being poor, the fates of so many of our poor residents are being sealed. And according to the Equality of Opportunity Project, listen, if you're born poor in Charlotte, you're likely to die poor. And in the starkest terms possible, this is proof that the American dream is dead for far too many of Charlotte's poor African American and Hispanic children. Dr. King said it best. He said, America has socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. Gustavo Gutierrez said, and I paraphrase, poverty is not a condition, it is an injustice. And it is a moral affront to a holy and righteous God. The Bible says, who takes care of the poor loves the Lord. Listen, you can't love God and oppress the poor. You can't love God and lock children in cages. You can't love God and not be concerned about the slums that damn them, the social conditions that cripple them, and the economic conditions that strangle our children. And as a God-loving people, we are called to rebuild the walls of opportunity and inclusion in order to protect the least of these from poverty, greed, injustice, and careless disregard. The text says that Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, became furious and angry when he saw that Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls. And to be clear, one of the reasons that Sanballat was angry is because Nehemiah's work, in a real sense, was a potential economic threat to the region that Sanballat controlled. In the Bible, Sanballat and Tobiah were two rulers of the Persian provinces that surrounded Jerusalem. And according to scholars, an independent, strong Jerusalem could have possibly undermined their control of the trade routes and thus potentially cut into their profits. In other words, this was likely an act of rapacious greed. Listen, whenever you see injustice, most times all you have to do is follow the money. Come on now, you know what greed is. Greed is already having enough of something but still wanting more by any means necessary. The provinces that Sanballat and Tobiah ruled over were already rich. They just wanted to be richer. They were already in control. They just wanted more control. Everything was already in their favor. They just didn't want to give up any power. Can I bring it closer to home? Listen, we're witnessing that same level of greed and lust for power today. And not just among nations, but also among individuals. Today, according to Oxfam, 8 billionaires have more money and wealth than 3.6 billion people across the globe. I said it too fast. Let me say it again. I said, according to Oxfam, 8 billionaires have more money and wealth than 3.6 billion people across the globe. And yet, there's a backlash against the move to raise the minimum wage to a measly $15 an hour. Outrageous. Warren Buffett put it this way. He said, there is, in fact, class warfare, but it is my class, the rich class, that's waging the war, and we are winning. And then check out what happens in the text. In the text, according to verses 7 and 8, in order to maintain control, Sanballat drops his differences with the Ammonites to the east, the Arabs to the south, and the Philistines to the west. And in retaliation against Nehemiah and the Jews, they came together to stop the reconstruction and the rebuilding of the wall. Have you ever noticed that whenever you are attempting to do something great and grand and it's about to take off, that some folks who don't even like each other but like you even less will come together, call a time out on their differences just to oppose you? Sometimes your enemies will call their enemies just to make sure you don't do what God purposed in your heart to do. Can I bring it closer to home? Listen, rich white people who really have nothing in common with poor white people except for this false construct of race will come together in solidarity just to oppress and criminalize black people and Mexicans and Muslims and trans and immigrants and refugees and other marginalized groups because they have been tricked into this ungodly mythology of heteronormative, patriarchal white supremacy. Listen, many poor whites will vote against their own interests, as several did several weeks ago in District 9, because they have been bamboozled and hoodwinked into believing that their real enemies are black and brown people rather than the fat cat greedy billionaires who have sucked all of the air out of the economy and who are really responsible for the reason the middle class is shrinking. The text says that Sanballat and Tobiah got angry. They got angry. Can I contemporize the text and bring it closer? When Reconstruction laws were passed after slavery that allowed blacks to be elected to office in record number, whites got angry and responded with domestic terrorism by the hands of the KKK. When blacks moved into northern cities during the Great Migration, ready to work hard for a decent living and good schools, white politicians got angry, rose up, and forced them into uninhabitable slums. When the Brown versus Board of Education decision was handed down in 1954, finally giving black children a chance to attend better schools, white authorities got angry and responded by shutting down schools and diverting money into private coffers, leaving millions of children in educational rot. When the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, the powers that be got angry and drafted the Southern Strategy, a racist tactic that stoked the fears of white people in an attempt to control the South for 100 years. When black mayors were elected in record numbers to major cities around the nation, the white power structure got angry and flooded the inner city with crack cocaine and passed tough crime bills that led to mass incarceration. But that's not all. When Donald Trump saw Barack Obama sitting in the White House, rebuilding the walls of healthcare, rebuilding the walls of the economy, rebuilding the walls of America's image abroad, he got angry and mocked the president and accused him of not even being born in this country. When 3 beautiful black women started Black Lives Matter in an effort to rebuild the walls of police accountability and rebuild the walls of justice for black and brown people in this country, folks got angry, accused them of reverse racism, and countered with lines like Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and I don't even have to tell you what's wrong with that. So the question is, how do we deal with the Sanballats and Tobias of the world? Well, first of all, we need to do what Nehemiah and the Jews did. In verses 6 through 9, it says, the Jews were not deterred by the insults of their opponents, and that they had a mind to work. Listen, there's nothing like the power of a made-up mind. The text says they were not distracted by the insults, and that they had a mind to do the work of the Lord. And in today's context, what is the work of the Lord? The prophet Micah, in Micah 6 and 8, answers that question and says, God has told us what is right and what God demands. Seek justice, love mercy, and humbly obey your God. In John 13 and 34, Jesus puts it this way, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another even as I have loved you. And Matthew 25 says, inasmuch as you do unto the least of these my brothers and sisters, you do it also unto me. I was hungry, and you fed me not. I was naked, and you clothed me not. I was in prison, and you visited me not. Can I give you the remix version? I was hungry, and you cut school lunch programs. I was in prison, and you privatized them. I was in need of a good education, and you resegregated the schools by race and class. I was thirsty, and you poured my water on the ground. I was a stranger, and you locked my kids into cages. I was in need of housing, and you gentrified the neighborhood. I was sick, and you denied me health care. I was naked and in need, and you gave tax breaks to the rich. Shame, shame, shame. I tell you, as a justice-loving people, we are recalled to rebuild the walls of justice and mercy because Cornel West was right. Justice is what love looks like in public. And that is the work. That is the work of the Lord. Feeding the poor, that's the work of the Lord. Clothing the naked, that's the work of the Lord. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, that's the work of the Lord. Ending mass incarceration, expanding economic opportunity, fixing the housing crisis, all of that is the work of the Lord. The final thing I want to praise Nehemiah and the Jews about is the fact that they had a heart to pray. In verse 9, the text says, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. What I love about that is the fact that this is a picture of faith and action side by side. Check them out. They prayed and posted a guard. Remember, Jesus even told his disciples to watch and pray. The text tells us that Nehemiah prayed, but then he posted a guard. In other words, we have to pray and work. We have to fast and fight. We have to worship and work. It's not just attending church service, but it's also extending our hands. It's not just talking about love, but it's also living a life of radical inclusion, charity, and hospitality. Too often we're waiting on a God who's waiting on us. We're wondering if God will make a way somehow, but God is wondering, what will we do with what we already have? Frederick Douglass said, I prayed for freedom for 20 years, but I didn't get an answer until I prayed with my legs. Let me close this way. Erwin Lutzer recounts a tragic story in his book called When a Nation Forgets God. In the book, Lutzer shares an eyewitness account of the way some church members reacted in Nazi Germany. Unlike members of the confessing church, many of the Christian churches in Germany were deceived into believing that fidelity to God was best demonstrated by their allegiance to the state. So Lutzer shares this chilling account from a Christian, and I slightly paraphrase. I lived in Germany during the Holocaust. I considered myself a Christian. We heard stories about what was happening, but we tried to distance ourselves from it because we didn't think we could do anything to stop it. A railroad track ran behind our small church, and every Sunday morning we could hear the whistle in the distance and then the wheels coming over the train tracks. We were disturbed when we heard those cries coming from the train because we knew what was happening. Week after week, the whistle would blow. We dreaded to hear the sound of those wheels because we knew it would be followed by cries of Jews on their way to the death camps, cries that tormented us. But we did nothing. In fact, when we heard the whistle blow, in order to drown out the cries, we started singing hymns. And as the train neared our church, we would simply sing louder and louder. We didn't want to hear those screams, so we sang as loudly as we could until we could hear them no more. Now, I don't know if this story is legendary or true, but we do know that many Christians in Germany did, in fact, look the other way. So my question to you this morning is, shall we, as a faith community, just sing louder in the face of calamity? As black and brown bodies are decimated, as poor people's lives are destroyed, is our response just to sing louder? As immigrants are kicked out, as laws are passed to make it harder to get ahead, as more money is pushed to the top, thus widening the already obscene gap between the rich and the poor, will our response be just to sing louder, to build more churches, to put on more programs, to have more conversations? As injustice marches like a tyrant across the globe, decimating the lives of the marginalized and the poor, will we continue to hide oppression behind piousness and prayers and just sing louder? Perhaps James Baldwin was right, and I paraphrase. Baldwin says, if religion doesn't make us freer, if it doesn't make us better, if it doesn't make us kinder, more radiant and more beautiful and more loving, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to get rid of it. Otherwise, all we are doing is just singing louder. Amen. Allow me to pray the Franciscan benediction. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, have truths and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in the world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen.
Welcome again to today's service. We're happy that you're with us here in this room or joining us remotely. We're pleased to have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you personally following this service. So if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, take note of any visitors seated near you. After the service, invite them for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance of the sanctuary. There's also an elevator available. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place it in an offering basket later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. The cards and offering envelopes are on clipboards at the end of your row. Please begin passing them down your row now. Visitors interested in hearing about how to become a member can talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. To learn more about how to engage with the life of this congregation, you can look through the back of your order of service or explore our website or subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, Currents. Reverend Robinson serves as one of the ministers of Holy Covenant United Church of Christ, and he has invited all of us to join their congregation next Friday evening and Saturday during the day for a workshop entitled Sacred Conversations to End Racism. And this event is free and open to all. And you can round out next weekend after services here Sunday. We're going to have a workshop entitled Can Happiness Save Us? Examining what happens to our collective well-being when capitalism goes unchecked and how we can respond. This past Friday was National Coming Out Day, and this morning we're sending love to our LGBTQ plus members, guests, friends, neighbors, and family. We celebrate your lives and the light you bring into the world. We pray for your safety and well-being in workplaces, houses of worship, schools, and at home. We give thanks for the ways our LGBTQ plus siblings help shape our shared humanity. In a moment when the offering baskets are being passed and music is being played, all are welcome, member or visitor alike, to come forward and light a candle. Our hope being that this simple, sacred act honors whatever gratitude, worry, celebration, or grief you are carrying with you this morning. Thank you again for your presence here and the many gifts you bring to this community. We'll now both give and receive our offering. close with these words by Mark Morrison Reed. It is the congregation that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. For alone, our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed.